Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at IronHack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast, because today we have with us Mfon. But before we take off, are you prepared to engage, Mfon?
Yes, I am.
Let's do this. Let's go. Because today we have Mfon Akpan, who is an assistant professor of accounting at Methodist University. He has a passion for emerging technologies and is an expert in virtual reality technology. And he teaches new technologies and educational methods to offer students a current, effective, and relative teaching experience. So, Mfon, what are we missing from that intro? What else should we know about you that we haven't mentioned?
I am an amateur power lifter. So I power lift, love lifting weights.
Nice. Sounds great. So, Mfon, talking about you, that intro, we would like to know very quickly if you can give us a sort of an oversight of what is a regular day or what is in general being Mfon these days look and feel like.
Well, if you want to go out, do you want to go by hour or just a quick overview?
Whatever your heart tells you.
Well, get up early, do some training, come home, eat breakfast, do some writing. So I'm working on some research projects. When I am teaching, so when it's in semester, I head into my office, teach classes, meet with students, have office hours, and then come back home and do it all over again.
Sounds absolutely great. The typical life of a professor, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's boring, but some people would say, that's not too exciting.
I do think so. I do feel the thrill of, at least for me, professor's life. I haven't done a PhD. I'm not sure if I will ever or not. But for me, the main thing of a professor's life, or at least the one I'm most excited about, is teaching. So that's always different, right? No matter how many times you've taught the same subject.
That's true. But one thing, Rob, not all professors like teaching. So I am one that loves to teach. And I have colleagues that do not like, they dread teaching, but they love to do research. So, it is interesting.
I'm not sure how we got to that point. There's certainly many historic reasons why we got there. I mean, people who don't like to teach are not going to be, are hardly going to be great teachers, and people who don't like to research are hardly going to be great researchers. And there's some who are sort of made and enjoy doing both. I know plenty of them. I have plenty of colleagues who enjoy doing both. There's others who don't. I don't know why we sort of need to have both things. I mean, there's this whole specialization and all that. So anyways, we're diverging quite a bit from our main subject here, which is to talk as well about inspiration from games and gamification. So, Mfon, we would like to go with you to a time when you were trying to use gamification in some way or another in your class or whatever your practice could look like. And, you tried to do something, it didn't go right. So it was a fail moment or a first attempt in learning, as we like to say. We want to be there with you. We want to feel that story. We want to have those lessons with you. We want to certainly walk right next to you on this story.
Yeah, I would say the failure was when we entered 2019. So when we were in lockdown with COVID, and I doubled down on using a platform called Verbella Frames. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's if you're familiar with VR or the Metaverse, it's a Metaverse learning platform. And the first time I planned on using it in the classroom, I did not prepare well enough. I didn't prepare for the fact that the students would embrace it quickly. And that may sound weird, but it's like a video. It's like going into a video game, right? So they can access this virtual environment on their computer. They use, they can use their phone or their keyboard, so using the same keys you would on a PC game to move around. And a lot of my planning and preparation was on the side of them not being able to. Basically, I was preparing heavily for them to have problems with it. And I over prepared for the problems, but I didn't prepare for the flip side. And the flip side was that within literally when I gave them the link to enter this virtual room, within, I mean, it was, I want to say less than 3 minutes, I've got like 30 students inside running all around in this virtual space. So I was, I guess, overwhelmed because I had to, and this may sound funny, but I had to manage the students inside of a virtual, they were running wild inside this virtual space, which I thought they wouldn't be able to figure out. So that was really a learning lesson for me to try to manage that type of situation and understand, okay, I've got to plan both ways, because, and I think many times we plan for the worst, but it's also important to plan for the best. So,
Yes, indeed. So I'm guessing that by the time you were sort of catching up to them, they were already testing the limits of the world, right?
Yeah, they were, because in this world, I had different activities planned out with whiteboards and different things in there. I had students writing on the whiteboards and erasing things, and they were just all over the place. So I had to really backtrack and rein things in. So what that taught me was, number one, talk to the students some more. So I got a lot of feedback from the students, and understand your audience, understand who you work, what they're familiar with as much as possible, and plan for it could be that they'll understand it. It'll be easy for them to use instead of thinking this will be something that's really hard for them to use and you have to kind of over explain things. So just look for both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm remembering the time we interviewed, I think it was Tammy Schrader, and she was, sort of trying to figure out, she hadn't played much games in her time, and she started introducing games into the classroom, right? So that was a big challenge for her. So she was like super worried, like, oh, what if, we have technical problems, or if this happens or that happens. And in reality, it was, it was the students helping her through any technical problems that were happening because they were so used to the medium as well, right? Even us, we can be relatively younger, or we might have had some experience with this. But, just the other day, I was, my cousin's daughters were at home, and we were trying to record this. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was something like recording the screen of the telephone in the same telephone, and I had no idea how to do it. She said, "Oh no, it's just this," and she grabbed the phone, and in less than a minute, she had already done it. And she had never taken my phone before. Literally, it's not like she was familiar with it. She just knew the way to do it, and she was great at it. Because again, they're sort of born into many of these technologies and many of these things. So we had to consider that side as well, as you were suggesting, Mfon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really it's a really good point, and you have and that is a big consideration, because so a month ago I gave a presentation to other accounting professors with the same platform, Verbella Frames, and it was, there were so many problems getting into it. They had issues with this, and I had to explain. So it was a different dynamic altogether. But once everybody got in, they were able to kind of maneuver around. But they weren't used to it. And like you were saying, when I polled the students, I asked them, I was like, wait a minute, I thought this was going to be hard for you guys. And I talked to the students, they were like, well, no, it's just like a computer game. So to move around, to get in, to set everything up, is just like if we're playing a PC game. So you had a good number of the students, they've played PC games before, and it wasn't an issue for them to get in and to maneuver around in the system.
The platform is Verbella, right? Virbela. Is that it?
Yeah, Verbella Frames, yes.
I didn't find the frames part. There's a verbella.com, which is what I found.
Yeah, that's the main company. Their educational platform is called Frame. And the person, his name is Dr., if I'm not mistaken, Howell. He's a professor. If you go to framevr.io, you can pull it up. But the person who created this platform is actually a professor. And this was part of a project, I think an MBA project, and then it grew into a whole business, and then it was acquired by a real estate, EXP Holdings real estate company. So they have a Verbella, which is their virtual, it's a metaverse. So they have a whole world with an office space and office suites and a whole kind of conference room where you can give presentations. They lease space. So MIT, other organizations lease virtual office space. So instead of using Zoom, they use Verbella. So the employees will go into this virtual world with their avatars and go to certain offices that are being leased by their company to have meetings. On the education side, they have the FrameVR.io. It's a free, I mean, you can sign up for free. You can create your own, they call them frames, your own worlds or lessons or environments where you can have classes, lessons, students meet, etc. in this. I want to say VR, but I guess metaverse in your own metaverse world as an educational platform, which is pretty good.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. I put definitely the references on the show notes. But Mfon, let's actually go for a situation where instead of, going for a first attempt in learning, we go actually for a success. One of those times where you did something you're proud of, telling that story. We want to, again, be there with you and maybe take some of those success factors.
I'll just parlay on this example with I can give you two examples. With the Verbella frames, I think that was very successful, and it worked out a lot better than I thought it would. So as I mentioned, I failed with this, in preparing for the positive side of things, that the students would embrace it. And it worked out better than I thought it would, in the sense that I was able to ultimately engage students across platforms. And what I mean by that is, as we moved through the pandemic and as we started coming back to class, and we had something, we call it high flex. So what would happen, you would have maybe 12 students in the class, then another 20 on Zoom, and you're in the classroom. So I would use that platform to actually engage the students across those barriers. So what I mean, the students in the classroom would hop into the metaverse, and then the students at home would hop in the metaverse, and that would be a common ground for them to communicate, engage, do assignments, group activities. And that worked well. Number one, keeping the students engaged. It worked well logistically. And what I mean by that is teaching class. And at this time, I was at a different institution, and our classes were 2.5 hours. So to keep students engaged for 2.5 hours on Zoom or it can be a challenge, specifically if you have some who are there with you, and then you have students who are at home, and they could be in their dorm or in another state or somewhere. So this brought them together, and the feedback was very positive. So I think I would look at that as a positive as far as a game-based solution. The other thing is, before all of this, I used a lot of team-based learning. So splitting students up into groups, having different assignments. So mixing them up in ways that they normally wouldn't group themselves to work together in teams to come up with solutions and give ideas. So I think doing that is very important, because if you think about it, there's a number. I think the average person spends over 7 hours a day on media. I think it says 7 hours a day, 2 hours and something on social media. And then I think there's another stat, an hour and something. I think it's more for males. Males spend, I think, over an hour a day playing games. Females, a little less than an hour. But if you think about, you're spending so much time in media, it's hard to get students' attention. So by having these activities, one of the huge positive is that you've got the students engaged, meaning you've got their attention and they're actually present and with you and in the activity. With the Verbella Frames or the Metaverse platform, they're there. I see them moving around. I know their names. Something lights up. It tells me that they're there. They're moving around. They're doing the activities, and they have to click on on the computer. So they're in the game actually. So the game is the learning. So I think that's a huge, huge positive.
Sounds absolutely great. Thank you for sharing those experiences with us. And Mfon, you've mentioned that you've done some of these things, and let's say that today somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I actually want to set up my own sort of metaverse VR experience for my classroom." What kind of a process of course, beyond the tech itself, because of course I'm sure that there's, the company has somebody to help people out or whatever that looks like, or tutorials and so on. But the process of the thinking behind it and how to integrate content or what to do, what not to do in the platform. How do you go about this? Do you have some form of process, some steps? How would you go about something like this?
Yeah, that's very good. I think ultimately you start with the end in mind. So what are you looking to do? Is this going to be something you're going to use every class, or is it one time a class? Is this going to supplement? So decide on how deep into your learning this will go. So that comes into the planning. The other thing with the planning is when they're in there, my recommendation, it's got to be meticulous. You've got to kind of walk through, write up, figure out the activities, estimate the time it'll take to complete the activities. I typically over prepare. So if I've got 2 items or 2 things that I want them to do, I'll add a third just in case they finish faster, so we have an extra activity.
From experience, right?
Yeah, definitely from experience. And it's important because you've got to think about it. It's so, I guess hearing it is a little weird, but you'll have about 30 people and you don't want them all running amok in these environments and going off and doing different things, which may sound funny, but that's what would happen if you don't have it tightly organized. And I would work with a lot of group activities and have them breaking up. So knowing who and you're going to pair up, how many, and really planning everything out and having it well structured. I think that's the most important thing to have, because they'll go off and go all around. The other thing with the metaverse is, here's a challenge that I did face. There were some students that did not have, they didn't have good internet. So that was something that held them back as far as their connection to the platform. So plan for that. And my other plan for that is I would have those students, I would still run Zoom. So I worked out ways where students, if they couldn't join into the virtual world, they could still be on Zoom. I'm sharing my screen and they can chat with their teammates through Zoom chat. So also thinking about different scenarios as far as how your students might be impacted with the technology, as far as if they're at home. Now, if they're in the classroom in the school, then you'll know what your internet situation is at your institution. But I would say, to answer in one word, planning, structure is very important.
There you go. Thank you so much for those recommendations, Mfon. Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement. And talking about, recommendations and your process that we mentioned a little bit ago, would you say that there is some sort of, I think you mentioned it already, and it's, it's all about planning and so on, but is there some sort of best practice, something that you would say, well, do this and perhaps your metaverse situation will go at least better than if not?
Yeah, I think the best thing is in my opinion, when approaching, if it's a game or if it's technology, don't do something for the sake of this is technology. Oh, wow, this is the metaverse. Lead in with what's going to benefit the student. How is this really going to help my students? Is this something, what's the why behind this? Why is this important for them to use this platform or to have this in there? What is this going to accomplish? And then what will they walk away from with it using this particular tool or game or technology? How is this going to help them? And what skills will they develop? I think that's and to tell them and to let them know, to let them know how this will help them.
Fantastic.
I wanted to add one story to that, which is a little bit, this ties into the pandemic. So if you think about in 2019, in fall of 2019, I was at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. I moved there from Chicago to teach there. And I would have guest speakers come into my class via Zoom. So this is in the fall of 2019.
Okay.
So I would have them come in via Zoom to the students. I taught the students how to use Zoom. Most of the students never heard of Zoom. And a lot of them didn't want to use
pre-pandemic,
Zoom.
Clearly.
Pre-pandemic. But this is, and I think this is important. This is how fast things can change. Pre-pandemic, they didn't like Zoom, didn't really want to use it. And I told them this is important. This is something that's used. You may have an interview, you may have something. So at least you're getting familiar with this. So it's important you learn it. And that's why I'm spending the time. So again, explaining to them why. So fast forward, after the pandemic, during the pandemic, this is in the summer of 2020, one of those students who was in that class emailed me and said, "Hey, professor, I really appreciate the fact that you spent that time with us going through what Zoom was, using Zoom, having us to do it because I had a job interview and they wanted to interview me over Zoom. And I didn't have anxiety because I've used it before and I knew what to do." And she was telling me, otherwise I would have had anxiety. I would have been nervous. I would have been worried because I wouldn't have known what to do with this or how it works. So I really appreciate you taking that time and you told us this. So I think it's important to explain these things instead of, we may know the reason and we may see the value, but I think it's important to let them know what the value is. And they may not see it right away. However, down the road, they may remember, hey, wait a minute, I remember this professor was saying like, hey, companies are using this. This is a certain tool, the data, the analytics, how it's being used. This is going to help us. This skill, I'm familiar with it. They may see it later on and thank you for it. So I think that's important.
Interesting. And giving that sort of transparency into why you're using these things and letting them know that that's going to be useful perhaps for them. Very good. Keeping the end in mind. So again, keeping in the recommendation space, after hearing these questions, maybe your mind went to saying, oh, if this person was answering this question, perhaps they would give me an interesting answer I haven't heard before. Have you thought about this? Is there a person you would like to hear on Professor Game sort of answering these questions? A future guest, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. I know who. A good acquaintance of mine, he's actually in Spain. And I know I probably not saying his name correctly. It's Pau Guardolia. I always say Pau. He's the chief creative officer at UCAM. And we've done a presentation together on the Metaverse, on Verbella and spatial. But his job at that university is to incorporate and help professors to use the Metaverse in their classroom. So he'll set things up for medical student, where they're looking at body parts so he sets up different projects and environments. So I would love to, I think he would be a great person to have.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So Pau, I'm guessing it's Guardiola, maybe?
Oh,
Is that?
yes, you say that much better than I do.
I was wondering. I was not entirely sure if that would be the direction, but of course, I'm from Venezuela, so I speak Spanish since I was a kid.
Uh,
So that sort of gave me some instinct. And living here in Spain, you kind of get familiar with some of the last names. So I'm assuming it was that. Like, is it like the? I don't know if you've heard of the guy in soccer and football, Pep Guardiola. Have you heard of him? He was super
no,
famous
God.
leading the Barcelona team to the Champions League so many times. I'm guessing it's along the lines of that last name. We'll
It's
see.
along the lines. It is. It's along the lines.
Great. So, Mfon, talking about recommendations, would you recommend some book for the engagers to read? Maybe about the metaverse, maybe about gamification, or maybe just general inspiration along whatever lines you want to go for.
Yes, there is a book from someone who I admire, Jeremy Bailenson. So he's a professor. I'm trying to think of the name of his book, but it is Experience on Demand. So he started a company, a virtual reality company they use in sports to help quarterbacks to throw better. But Jeremy Bailenson, his book it's called Experience on Demand, what virtual reality is, how it works, and what it can do. So I think if you're interested in the metaverse and in VR, I would recommend that book. And of course, I'm going to give a shameless plug. I would recommend my book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Virtual Reality. And now that book is geared more so towards educators. So if you're a teacher, kindergarten to university level, and you're interested in implementing or using virtual reality as a game or introducing it to students, I give ways to do that. And in the book, and why I think it's important is that many times, particularly here, we may say, well, you know what, we don't have the money. We don't have the budget to get headsets or to get equipment or to get certain things. So in that book, there's different ways that you can low cost, no cost ways where you can introduce students to virtual reality or the metaverse, into that technology. So those would be two books I would recommend.
For sure. I will definitely have your book in the show notes, and we'll have your recommendation for Jeremy's book. So, talking about these things, we now know who you would like to hear from. We now know what books you would recommend the engagers to read. How about you? What would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do at least better than most other people?
I think the one thing that I do better than most people is I try to approach things with an open mind. So with my foot forward. And I'm always willing to try something at least once, and I try to focus on the positive. As I gave that example earlier when I was putting it, working with the Verbella frames, I was thinking of the negative, but I try to most of the time think of the positive and try to see how I can connect the dots with different items and to actually try my best to look into the future and to see what's coming next. And I force myself to do that. It's not something, a lot of my colleagues and things like, oh, you love technology. I love my students and I love to do what's right for them. And what I mean by that is and I'm a university professor, so from an accounting professor, so I have to think, I get a freshman today or this year or in the fall, I've got to prepare them for what's going to happen or what's going to be in the world 4 years from now, because they're not going to be working today. They're going to be working down the road. So I have to kind of have my foot, forward and kind of looking and kind of thinking, well, what will they encounter? What can I expose them to? What skills can I help them to attain that'll help them when they leave? So I think just pushing myself in that way, I think that's a big thing. I'm passionate about the metaverse. a lot of so when I wrote that book, I just want to say this. When I wrote that book, I want to say 2019, published in 2020, and technology changed. So if you read it today, the stuff that I'm talking about in the book, a lot of the headsets and things, it's not dated, but I mean, it's not obsolete, but it's old, because we didn't have Verbella frames, we didn't have spatial, and all of these other web platforms, they were not around at that time when I was writing the book. So this shows you how fast things change. And a lot of my colleagues were like, well, why are you writing this book? I guess I had a little, aha moment when Mark Zuckerberg said he's changing the name of Facebook to Meta and the Metaverse. Nobody asked me that question anymore. I was like, yes, when he made that announcement, and no one asked me that question on why did you write the book and why is it, why is this important? But I think that goes to show. So you asked about that superpower. It's a hard thing, but it's something to just keep pushing myself to kind of look at what's next and what's coming down the road.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So, Mfon, we're arriving towards the end of the interview. If there's anything else you want to sort of tell us, any final piece of advice, any direction you want to point us to as well, besides your book, where else can we find more about you and about your work before we say that it's game over? Oh, actually, no, we haven't asked you a very difficult question.
Oh,
we haven't
okay.
asked you, what is your favorite game?
Ooh, that's a tough one. If it counts as a game, that what I'm usually, it would be a platform called spatial.io, another metaverse platform. So I'm usually in spatial.io, going to different rooms, going to different art galleries that are there. So it's a very interesting free metaverse platform where you can create meeting spaces, classrooms, but also you can travel to different rooms, different spaces that are created. You can meet people there. So I spend, if that's a game, I play a lot of spatial.io.
I don't know. You're the one who plays it, so I can't classify it. I haven't played it myself.
I don't know if you call it it's so, I go into these virtual worlds. So I'll go into Decentraland. So I'll go into the sandbox, but I guess you call it a game, but, and the reason I say that hesitantly, and it's a game because it's really compared to Fortnite. So I have students, I've gone into Fortnite and things, and people go in to just kind of hang out as well. You play, but people go in and kind of hang out in there. So I guess you can call it a game. So that's my favorite game, spatial.io.
Sounds absolutely great. I'll check it out. And so where can we find out more about what you do, your work, of course, besides your book, which will be in the show notes for sure. And any final piece of advice or any final words you want to give the engagers?
Yeah, I just want to say you can email me info@mfonakpan.com if you have any questions or need any help with anything. I'm always open to anybody reaching out and connecting. As far as the words of wisdom, just keep going. Keep working. I think one thing to realize, like I was given those numbers about, the average person spends 7.5 hours a day on media. That's conservative. And some estimates will say it's like 12 to 14 hours. And then you say, well, how is that possible? Because people multitask. I have students that say they'll listen to a podcast. They have Joe Rogan playing in the background. They get on their phone, they check Instagram, they do their work. So people are multitasking. So I think that gamification is very important when you tie it into learning, because that pulls you, it gets someone's attention. It gets someone attention, and it also gets them to, for a little bit, they may forget they're actually learning, so I think those are the things we have to think about, especially from the education side of things. That's just the way it is. And many of my colleagues may try to fight it and say, well, oh no, you have to do that. But you can't change the way that's just the way things are flowing. So I think work on meeting people where they are. I think that's the important thing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mfon. And if you want to find out about this episode, it's easy. Just go to the search bar and type Mfon, which is Mfon. There'll definitely be just one episode about this. Or if there's more, it's still with Mfon. So you'll definitely find everything you want to find about Mfon right there. Just professorgame.com, type Mfon, Mfon, and you'll find all of this information on the website. So thanks again, Mfon, for sharing with us all of your knowledge, all of your experience, all of these stories that you've also shared, all of those things that you've experienced by yourself and with others. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it is fantastic to have you here, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Mfon. How are you listening to this podcast, if I may ask? If you're using a podcasting app, whichever app that is, have you followed, subscribed, rated, whatever that looks like in that app? Have you done that for this podcast? Because if you haven't done so, I would ask you to please do so. That way we can reach more engagers like you and achieve our mission of making learning amazing. If you want instructions for some of the main podcasting apps, all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/iTunes. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, do that subscribe, that rate, that follow. All of these are options that are completely for free. And listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.